Hey there and welcome back to another Miraculous Ladybug video. And today, I want to talk about the state of the Miraculous Ladybug franchise and fandom, its popularity, all that good stuff, because I'll be honest, I don't think it's in a very healthy place at all. I'm starting to think the fandom's dying off hard, and that the future's looking quite bleak for the franchise as a whole. And this isn't the first time I've made a video talking about this topic. Around 2 years ago at the end of Season 3, I started coming to the same sort of conclusions, that the fandom was dying off, that fans were seeing the writing on the walls and were beginning to abandon ship. And at that time, at the conclusion of Season 3, I think people's main issues were the absolute dog shit release schedule and the kind of dodgy writing. And so yeah, we'll start with the release schedule. This show is famous for two things: having weirdly long gaps between the release of episodes and releasing said episodes wildly out of order, which means that things don't always make that much sense. For instance, during Season 3, I remember a big team-up episode being released that used heroes that hadn't even made their debut yet. So it's like, oh, okay, sure, I guess this is happening now. And so that really did start to piss people off. And meanwhile, sometimes you'd have to wait weeks to months between episodes, which was doubly frustrating because it kills the season's momentum, and it just makes you care a lot less about what's going on. If there was a long gap between seasons, I think it would have been fine. But massive gaps mid-season, episode to episode, they were really damaging to the long-term growth and success of the show. And on top of this, Season 3 was famous for filler episodes that added nothing to the story. Its snail-paced plot progression, where nothing interesting would happen outside 1 or 2 episodes, and less than thrilling story arcs. Like seriously, did anybody actually think that Miracle Queen was a good idea? That episode will surely go down in history as the all-time worst finale for the show's entire run, unless they spectacularly shit the bed in the future. So yeah, in hindsight, Season 3 was not the best season of the show, and I think a lot of people began to turn away from it as a result. But the release of Season 4, which was promised to be the most exciting season of the show of all time, as well as the release of 2 special episodes, really helped to reinvigorate the fandom. And for the most part, the writing did improve. They cut down on a lot of the filler. There were longer arcs that intertwined over multiple episodes, character progression, character growth, interesting story arcs, actual progress on identity reveals, actual progress on the romantic interest storylines. And so while some storylines were kind of bungled, I'm looking at you, Luca and Kagami, I think they really did work hard to improve the overall quality of the story. And hey, even the TV stations started to pull their weight a little bit and released episodes at a little bit of a more consistent rate. But once again, it wasn't perfect in that regard either. The show would get some momentum up. Stations would release a couple of episodes every week or two, and then boom, silence for a month or more. And sometimes these episodes were out of order, and it's just like, oh. So there was improvement, but it still wasn't perfect. And so whilst they did start to rehab the image of the show, the same old complaints did remain, and would continue to threaten the long-term popularity and longevity of the series. And look, I'm not coming after Asterisk & Co. here. They did their part. They did improve the storyline. They fixed a lot of the pacing issues, they juiced up the character development, but then they got let down by the distribution side of things. And they caught all the flack, but more on that later. So that's pretty much where we were at the end of Season 4. A better place than the end of Season 3, but still not really perfect. So Season 5 felt like it was the season that really needed to address some of these production problems. Another boost on the writing side of things, and a much needed boost on the production and distribution side of things. And then they start out really goddamn strong. There was hardly even a gap between the final episodes of Season 4 and the first episode of Season 5, which meant they kept up a lot of momentum coming off that really good 2-part finale. People were invested, people were excited, and then it's the same old shit. Delays, 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 only this time, if what I've heard is true, then it isn't even the TV companies that are letting us down anymore. It's the actual production companies. Now, don't quote me on this, but I've heard that they actually have a bunch of episodes ready to go, but since this season's very much one that needs to air chronologically, and since episode 3's not finished yet somehow, they're being held up and thus nothing can be released. And it's like, oh, why is it that every season something happens that ensures there are significant delays between episodes? Why can they never have a clean run? And honestly, I think this is probably the main thing that's really just driving people away. It's a terrible way to tell your story. And let me explain my reasoning. In your average TV show, things usually play out like this. The first episode of Season 1 releases, and then each week there's a new episode to watch. And over that first season, the fandom begins to grow and grow. Each week, in the lead up to the next episode, there's discussion and theorizing and artwork, all that sort of stuff going on. If the show's good, it'll keep building hype right until it hits the finale. And then after that, it has a massive influx of engagement before it cools down to a bit of a simmer in that off season, before you get the first trailer and the hype begins to build again. And then the best quality shows, those that are both well written and manage to capture that audience, they keep growing season after season. The hype builds and builds. Think Game of Thrones at its peak. The first episode is massive because first episodes of each season are always massive. Then after that, it sort of wears off. But still, the hype will begin to swell up again with each subsequent episode. Each episode's going to be bursting with hype. And the week between the releases is filled up with theories, analysis, discussions, critiques, hype posts, artwork, fanfiction, memes, anything you can think of. That's how this shit works. Right up to that finale, and then during the off-season, there's a little bit more discussion than the previous off-season. Every time the season ends, fewer people from the fandom leave. More people stick around to keep talking about it in anticipation for the upcoming season. More people buy into that hype. And it's pretty much the same deal for any major show. My Hero Academia is a good one. There's massive hype throughout the weekly release schedule, which culminates in the finale. And then in the off-season, there's still a lot of engagement. More every year. And it's the same with Attack on Titan, etc, etc. That's just how these things usually work. And thus, I do think it's a bit of a problem that Miraculous doesn't seem to follow this trend at all. And that's almost all down to its very erratic release schedule. And I'm not going to point fingers and blame individual groups. After all, it is what it is. But what it is also slowly killing the show. Because the way that Miraculous's popularity works has for me always seemed a little bit unsustainable. They release an episode, there's massive hype around the episode, and then there's no follow-up. And so the interest doesn't keep going, it slowly peters off. And then a month or so later, we have a new episode. And then the next week, there's another episode. The next week, another episode. The show is finally building that momentum, that weekly momentum where it swells. You're getting some more interaction, more engagement, more interest, more theories, more discussion. And then it just stops for months on end. And that interest dies away. And on it goes. It happened during season 3. And in the off-season, it felt like a lot of people were very much at their breaking point. And I think season 4 was somewhat able to redeem this via good writing decisions, or mostly good writing decisions. But once again, the release schedule let it down. And so after that initial burst of interest, it dies off again quite significantly between the episodes. There'd be moments of massive engagement, like the day before and the day after the episode releases. Or like when the finale got leaked, and then the next 2 months there was heaps of engagement and interest, as people knew when the second part was coming, and they were excited for it, they were hyped up. And this phenomenon was repeated again when the first episode of season 5 was announced. And they held firm with a quick second episode, that's how it's done. But then nothing. And once again we return to that same status quo, where after an episode there's that quick burst of engagement, but then the radio silence kicks in, as to when we're going to get the next episode, and so the interest begins to die off quite heavily. Because realistically, why should people care about a show to that extent when the show is released in such an inconsistent manner? When you don't actually know when you're going to get to see the next episode. And I honestly think we're seeing it start to drive down interest across the board, because why bother caring when so many other shows are able to release content at a far more consistent schedule? People want stability in their lives, but Miraculous is the equivalent of a friend who hangs out with you every day for a couple of weeks and then ghosts you for 6 months before randomly asking you to chill again. You wouldn't be expected to still care that much about a friend who treats you like that. So why should we still care that much about these sort of shows? When there are so many others out there that actually, release episodes on a consistent basis. And I get for the most part it's not the creator's fault, yeah? But that also doesn't mean that it's not negatively impacting the growth and popularity of the show itself. And I think if things don't change going forward, I can't see how this maintains enough popularity to go for as long as Zag seems to want it to go for. Something's eventually going to give. And the longer it takes to get this shit under control, the harder they're going to have to work every season to regain the trust and the viewership of the fan base. Seriously, I used to make heaps of videos about Miraculous, but it's so much harder to have fun engaging with a fan base that is noticeably shrinking. Hell, in a couple of months we might be looking back on this video laughing at how wrong I am when they release 10 back-to-back episodes or something like that, but for now, I can only say, I doubt it. I just don't have much faith anymore. And that does make me a little bit sad. But anyway, with all that being said, these are just my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think about what I've just said? Do you agree the fandom's dying off quite a bit? Do you think I'm right on the main reason why, or maybe you completely disagree? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.